Humanity had spread across the stars faster than any species in recorded galactic history. In mere centuries, they had colonized thousands of worlds, adapted to unthinkable environments, and reshaped the balance of power in the Milky Way. Other species watched in awe and horror as humans defied every expectation, but their chaotic nature made them unpredictable. Unlike the structured empires of the galaxy, humanity was fractured into independent nations, corporations, and alliances. Some believed this division was their greatest weakness. Others feared what would happen if they ever united. The turning point came with the discovery of the Nexus Gate, an ancient alien megastructure hidden at the heart of the Sagittarius cluster. The gate was a relic from a long-extinct race, a colossal construct capable of instantaneously linking distant galaxies. It was a prize beyond measure, a gateway to untold riches and power, and humanity had found it first. But they were not alone. The Zalari Dominion, an expansionist empire that had ruled for millennia, claimed the Nexus Gate as their own. They mobilized their fleets, preparing to drive the upstart humans away. Other galactic factions, from the pragmatic Vortari guilds to the enigmatic Lutheri Concord, watched with bated breath. The outcome of this conflict would determine the future of the galaxy. Humanity did not hesitate. Their fleets assembled like never before. Old rivalries were cast aside as human nations, corporations, and warlords united in a way the galaxy had never seen. They did not fight as scattered factions but as a singular force with a common purpose. The battle for the Nexus Gate was unlike any before. Zalari warships, armed with weapons refined over millennia, clashed with human vessels driven by innovation and sheer audacity. The Dominion commanders expected an easy victory. Instead, they faced an enemy that adapted in real time, that turned every setback into an advantage. Humanity did not fight like an empire. They fought like a species that refused to be shackled. For weeks, the war raged. The Zalari, confident in their overwhelming numbers and technology, found themselves outmaneuvered at every turn. Human pilots executed impossible maneuvers. Their ground forces fought with unbreakable resolve. The Dominion's most advanced dreadnoughts fell to human ingenuity and sheer, reckless bravery. And then, in the final battle over the Nexus Gate, humanity struck the final blow. A fleet of human ships, barely holding together, launched a desperate assault on the Zalari command ship. They did not fight for wealth or power. They fought for the right to decide their own fate. As the Zalari flagship fell, their forces collapsed. The Dominion withdrew, humiliated and broken. The galaxy was forever changed. Humanity had proven they were not just another minor species clawing for survival. They were a force to be reckoned with. A force that even the oldest empires feared. But with victory came a question that had long been avoided. Who would lead them? Humanity had always thrived in chaos, but now, they faced a future where unity was no longer a temporary necessity. The Nexus Gate was theirs, but the power it represented required leadership. If they remained divided, the galactic empires would return, stronger and more determined. And so, for the first time in human history, they made a choice. Not a president. Not a prime minister. Not a council. A single ruler. A galactic emperor. But who? The leaders of Earth, Mars, and the countless colonies debated for weeks. Every faction had its own candidate, each vying for control. The corporations sought a ruler who would prioritize expansion. The military demanded a warlord. The idealists dreamed of a philosopher king. The debates turned to arguments. The arguments turned to threats. Then, as tensions reached their peak, a name emerged. Not a politician. Not a conqueror. Not a corporate leader. A soldier. A commander who had led the final charge against the Zalari. A warrior who had fought on the front lines when others remained in the safety of their war rooms. A leader who had never sought power but had earned the respect of every soldier who had stood beside them. The factions hesitated. Could a warrior rule an empire? But the soldiers knew the answer. The people knew the answer. And so, on a newly built throne world at the edge of the Nexus Gate, beneath the banners of a united humanity, the first Galactic Emperor was crowned. Not by decree, but by the will of those who had fought, bled, and died for a future that was now theirs. The newly crowned Galactic Emperor stood before the assembled representatives of humanity's many factions. The great hall of the Nexus throne, built at the edge of the newly won Nexus Gate, echoed with the murmurs of skeptics and hopefuls alike. Never before had humanity spoken with one voice, and many doubted that they could start now. The corporations feared regulation. The military feared being sidelined. The independent colonies feared losing their autonomy. Yet they had all agreed that humanity needed a single leader, and now they had one. The question remained whether they would follow. The Emperor, clad not in royal finery but in the battle-worn armor they had worn in the final war, stepped forward. They raised a single gauntlet hand, and the hall fell silent. When they spoke, it was not in the language of politics but in the raw, unyielding voice of a soldier who had fought in the mud, in the void, and in the fire. They spoke of the sacrifices made. Of the pilots who had died in burning wrecks, of the soldiers who had bled on distant worlds, of the civilians who had endured suffering beyond measure. They reminded every faction that humanity had not won this victory through greed or ambition but through unity. And now, standing at the precipice of a new era, they would not allow that unity to fracture. The words resonated like a battle cry. There was no talk of taxation or bureaucracy, no promises of endless prosperity. There was only a single command, delivered not as a ruler but as a warrior speaking to their comrades in arms. We go forward together. Or we fall apart and lose everything. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, one by one, the assembled leaders bowed. Not because they were forced. Not because they had been outmaneuvered. But because, for the first time, they saw a leader who did not seek power for its own sake. A leader who had earned the right to command not by birth or manipulation, but by standing shoulder to shoulder with those who had fought. With the factions momentarily united, the Emperor turned to the next challenge. The Nexus Gate was a mystery. It had been built by a civilization so ancient that even the oldest empires had no records of them. The few expeditions that had ventured inside had returned with tales of impossible technology, of dormant systems waiting to be awakened. Some whispered that it was a weapon. Others believed it was a gateway to entire new galaxies. But one truth was undeniable. Whatever lay beyond the Nexus Gate would change everything. The Emperor wasted no time. They ordered a fleet assembled, not for war but for discovery. The finest scientists, explorers, and engineers were gathered. The best ships of humanity, from Earth's battleships to the deep space vessels of the outer colonies, were refitted for an expedition into the unknown. The mission was clear. Find the secrets of the Nexus Gate. Secure them for humanity. Ensure that no alien empire could ever claim them. As the fleet prepared, whispers spread across the galaxy. The Zalari Dominion, humiliated by their defeat, had not forgotten their loss. Their spies infiltrated human space, their agents seeking any sign of weakness. Other factions, too, watched with growing unease. The Vortari guilds, once content to profit from humanity's wars, now feared they had created an unstoppable force. Even the enigmatic Lutheri Concord, who had remained neutral, sent emissaries with veiled warnings. Do not awaken what sleeps beyond the gate. But humanity had never been known for heeding warnings. They had never been ones to turn away from the unknown. The day came when the fleet stood ready. The Emperor, refusing to rule from a distant throne, boarded the lead ship personally. As the great engines roared to life, as the Nexus Gate's dormant systems flickered with power, the galaxy held its breath. And then, with a burst of unimaginable energy, the first human fleet passed through the Nexus Gate and disappeared into the void beyond. The moment the fleet passed through the Nexus Gate, every sensor and communication system aboard their ships went dark. For several heartbeats, there was nothing but silence. No stars. No signals. No familiar constellations. Just an endless, oppressive blackness. Then, as suddenly as it had vanished, reality snapped back into place. The ships emerged into a new region of space, one untouched by any known civilization. The view outside their ships was breathtaking and terrifying in equal measure. Before them stretched a vast graveyard of derelict vessels, thousands of them, some larger than entire space stations, others barely recognizable as ships at all. The remnants of an ancient war, frozen in the abyss. Some bore scars from weapons no human had ever seen, their hulls twisted into impossible shapes. Others seemed eerily intact, as if their crews had simply vanished. The fleet's navigators worked frantically to re-establish their bearings. Their star charts were useless. The very physics of this place felt subtly wrong, as if space itself had been altered by whatever had transpired here. The Emperor, standing at the command deck of the lead ship, wasted no time. Orders were given. Scouting teams were deployed. As the first human vessels approached the wreckage, they quickly realized that this battlefield was ancient, so ancient that some of the ships had partially fused with drifting asteroids. Yet despite the passage of time, some systems still flickered with weak power signatures. One ship in particular stood out. Unlike the others, it was not a derelict but a fortress, a station embedded within the remains of a shattered world. Its structure was unlike anything seen before, vast, geometric, pulsing with an eerie blue glow. And at its heart, deep within its ruined corridors, there was movement. A salvage team was sent in. They moved carefully through the silent halls, their lights casting long shadows against alien metal. The deeper they went, the more the station seemed to react. Walls shifted subtly. Patterns of light flickered as if sensing their presence. Then, without warning, the station came alive. A pulse of energy surged through the structure, and for the first time in untold millennia, something awoke. The salvage team barely had time to react before doors slammed shut behind them. The lights turned a deep, pulsating crimson. Strange, indecipherable symbols flickered across the walls. Then, a sound filled the air, not a voice, not words, but something deeper. A presence. A will. The Emperor, watching from the command deck, received the first and only transmission before the station systems scrambled all communications. A single phrase. Spoken in perfect, unaccented human speech. You should not have come here. And then the station's defenses activated. The station erupted with life as automated defense systems roared back to power. Massive energy signatures flared up, and ancient turrets unfolded from the walls, tracking the human fleet with terrifying precision. The once silent corridors became a death trap as hidden drones emerged, moving with eerie, insect-like efficiency. The salvage team, trapped inside, had only seconds to react. Their suits' HUDs flickered with unreadable warnings as the air around them grew charged with static energy. Then the first drone attacked, a blur of motion that tore through one of the soldiers before the others even registered the threat. Their weapons roared to life, but the enemy moved like ghosts, phasing in and out of reality, their bodies distorting like glitches in a simulation. Outside, the Emperor wasted no time. The fleet's weapons locked onto the station, but before a single shot could be fired, the void itself seemed to resist. Space twisted around the structure, forming a shimmering distortion field that bent reality itself. Energy beams that should have landed direct hits curved away at the last second. Missiles detonated prematurely, their targeting systems scrambled. This was not just a fortress. It was a prison. And something inside wanted to keep it that way. The Emperor ordered the fleet to reposition, looking for any weak spots in the station's defenses. Meanwhile, inside, the salvage team fought desperately to survive. Every step forward felt like stepping deeper into the unknown. The corridors were shifting, rearranging, as if the station itself was alive. And at the heart of it all, something was watching. A lone technician, separated from the main group, stumbled upon a chamber unlike any other. Unlike the cold metal halls outside, this room pulsed with something organic, something ancient. Suspended in the center of the chamber was a massive, coffin-like structure, covered in intricate symbols that pulsed with faint blue light. Unlike the hostile systems outside, this place felt, waiting. The technician reached out, their gloved fingers barely brushing against the surface of the structure. A shockwave erupted from the chamber, rippling through the entire station. For a split second, every hostile drone froze in place. Every turret powered down. The fleet outside detected a momentary collapse in the station's defensive field. And then, a voice. Not a warning this time. Not a threat. A question. Who reigns? The words echoed through every human ship, through every soldier's mind. The Emperor, standing on the command deck, felt the weight of it like a physical force. They stepped forward. Stared at the swirling patterns on the main view screen. And answered. Humanity reigns. For the first time, the station did not resist. The ancient defenses powered down. The distortion field flickered and collapsed. The remaining drones halted in place. The chamber at the heart of the station released a deep, mechanical sigh, like the exhale of something that had waited far too long. And then the structure at the center of the chamber began to open. The chamber's massive structure slowly unfolded, revealing its contents. Inside the coffin-like shell, an entity lay dormant, suspended in a network of translucent tendrils. It was humanoid in shape, but its features were alien. Its skin was a dark, shifting material, its eyes wide and black as the void itself, filled with patterns that seemed to flicker in and out of existence. The being was ancient, its form encased in what appeared to be a crystalline cocoon, yet it seemed to resonate with power. The technician, now joined by the rest of the team, stood frozen in awe. They had come to explore, to uncover the secrets of the Nexus Gate, but they had found something far more enigmatic. The walls around them pulsed with energy, and the air felt thick with the weight of forgotten knowledge. A sense of urgency swept over them, but also a profound respect. This being was not just a remnant of the past, it was a key. The Emperor watched through the station's surveillance feeds, their heart pounding in their chest. The fleet remained in position, but they were no longer the aggressors. The tables had turned. What had been a terrifying enemy was now a dormant force that held the promise of unimaginable power, yet the Emperor knew that this power came with unknown consequences. They had not come to conquer this place but to understand it. As the team moved closer to the being, a voice, not a physical voice but a mental one, reached out to them. It was not the same as before, not the question of, who reigns, but something deeper, something more primal. You have unlocked the threshold. The technician, a young woman named Rhea, stepped forward, her hands trembling as she reached out to touch the tendrils encasing the entity. Her voice, barely a whisper, broke the silence. Who are you? She asked, but it was as if she was speaking to the very fabric of space itself. The being's eyes flickered, and the tendrils shifted, responding to her question. The answer was not immediate, but the entire station seemed to vibrate with the weight of its history. A long, slow pulse of energy rippled through the station, shaking the walls, flickering the lights. We are the architects. We are the ones who shaped the stars, ****. The words reverberated through Rhea's mind. She stumbled back, horrified, but also captivated by the presence of something so powerful, so ancient. The team's weapons were useless against this force, it was not an enemy to be defeated. It was something more, something beyond comprehension. The Emperor's voice came through the comms, breaking the tension in the room. What's happening down there? What have you found? Rhea, still reeling from the experience, struggled to gather her thoughts. It's not a weapon. It's not something to fight. The entity's voice interrupted her thoughts. We created the Nexus. We built the gateways. We shaped the very fabric of existence. But we were betrayed, ****. The words chilled her to the bone. Betrayal. She could feel the weight of the emotion behind it, a longing, a bitterness that stretched across eons. The room seemed to close in around them, the air growing heavier. The others have fallen. The galaxy is in ruin. But you are different. You are not like those who came before. You are the inheritors, ****. The Emperor stood in silence, listening to the transmission. The tension in the room back on the fleet grew. This wasn't just about the Nexus Gate. This wasn't about conquering a new realm, it was about legacy, the past, and something that had been left unfinished. The entity's form began to shift, its eyes locking onto the human team with an intensity that was almost overwhelming. To inherit the stars is to understand them. Will you take the mantle of the architects? Will you rise from the ashes of the galaxy's destruction? Or will you fall as they did? Rhea, trembling but resolute, finally spoke, her voice stronger than before. We will rise. We won't repeat the mistakes of the past. For a brief moment, there was no response. The room fell still, silent, as the entity seemed to contemplate her answer. Then, a soft hum filled the air, and the once dormant being slowly began to open its eyes. The blue glow that had once seemed distant and cold now pulsed with warmth, and the room filled with a profound sense of awakening. You are worthy. The Nexus will be yours. But know this, the path ahead will not be easy. You must be vigilant. The architects are not the only ones who have left their mark on the stars. Others will come for what you have claimed, ****. The entire station trembled, and the once still ship surrounding it began to vibrate with energy. The power of the Nexus Gate surged, flowing into the hearts of the fleet, and the galaxy seemed to hold its breath. The Emperor, now standing on the bridge of their flagship, gazed at the unfolding scene with a quiet resolve. Humanity had not just claimed the Nexus. They had claimed the future. But with that claim came an undeniable truth. They were no longer just survivors. They were the inheritors of a legacy far older and far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. And the galaxy, already on edge, would soon know the true power of humanity's ambition. The moment the entity acknowledged humanity's right to the Nexus, the energy within the station escalated to unimaginable levels. The Nexus Gate hummed louder, its power surging through the human fleet, connecting their ships to the heart of the ancient structure. It was as if the very fabric of the universe had been shifted, with the Nexus as its center. On the station, the architects being continued to stir, its form now fully awake. The tendrils that once held it in place retreated into the walls of the chamber, revealing an intricate network of symbols and lines embedded in the station's core. The room vibrated with power, and the voices of the architects echoed faintly through the minds of every human present. The path you have chosen is fraught with peril. You are the inheritors of what was once a grand civilization, but the stars are no longer safe. There are others who seek the power you now hold, those who will stop at nothing to claim it for themselves, ****. The Emperor stood at the helm of their ship, watching the transmission unfold. The words were both a warning and a promise, a sign that humanity was no longer playing the role of an underdog, but was now in a position of immense influence. The galaxy would never be the same. For the Emperor, the stakes had never been clearer. They were no longer a ruler of a scattered species, clinging to survival. They were now the leader of an empire that had the power to shape the future of all sentient life. But with this newfound power came the looming shadow of the unknown. As the Emperor considered the entity's warning, another transmission came through. This one was from the distant reaches of human space, news of a threat. The Zalari Dominion, though humbled by their defeat, had not abandoned their claim on the Nexus. They were regrouping, and intelligence suggested that a massive fleet was assembling at the edge of the galaxy, preparing to strike once more. This time, they would not come alone. The Emperor's eyes narrowed. They had expected this. There would always be those who sought to take power by force. But humanity was different now. They had the power of the architects and the secrets of the Nexus Gate. The Emperor knew that they couldn't wait for the enemy to come to them. The time to act was now. The fleet was called to arms. But this was not the same conflict as before. This was no longer a struggle for survival or territory, it was a war for the future. Humanity would not cower in the face of threats. The Emperor would lead them to victory, but they had learned one painful truth during the war with the Zalari: unity was fragile. division still ran deep within humanity's ranks. The corporations, the independent colonies, and the military had all been forced together by necessity, but those old rivalries had not been erased by a shared victory. To truly rule, to wield the power of the Nexus Gate, the Emperor needed to unite the fractured species they led. This would be a test, not just of military might, but of leadership. The Emperor called for a grand assembly, bringing together the representatives of every faction, every colony, and every military force that had fought under their banner. The central command station, perched in orbit around the Nexus, became a hive of activity as diplomats, generals, and corporate magnates filed in, each bringing their own agendas with them. The meeting room was filled with tension as the representatives took their seats. The Emperor, now seated at the head of the table, surveyed the room. The various factions glared at each other across the long, gleaming surface. A few exchanged curt nods, but there was no warmth. The Emperor knew that this was the moment that would define their reign. If they failed here, the unity of the human species would crumble. The Emperor spoke first, their voice calm, but carrying an undeniable authority. We stand at the edge of a new era. The Nexus Gate is ours, and with it, the future. But we cannot divide ourselves now. If we are to claim this galaxy as ours, we must do so as one. We will face threats from without, and there will be those who will challenge us from within. I will not rule through fear or force, but by the will of the people. If you seek power for your own ends, you will find none here. But if you seek unity, if you seek a future for all of humanity, then we will rise together, ****. The room fell silent as the Emperor's words sank in. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, one by one, the representatives stood. The leader of the military, a hardened general, was the first to step forward. We stand with you, Emperor. We will fight, not for ourselves, but for all of humanity, ****. Next, a representative from the corporate sector rose. Their tone was measured but respectful. The future is uncertain, but the profits from controlling the Nexus Gate would be beyond anything we've ever dreamed of. We'll stand by you, for now, ****. The murmurs that followed were mixed, but there was a palpable shift in the room. The idea of a unified human empire, not ruled by the whims of a scattered government or fractured nations, was beginning to take root. Even the more independent colonies, who had feared being absorbed into a singular authority, seemed to reconsider their stance. The Emperor nodded, knowing that this moment would be the key to their reign. There was still much to be done, much to be worked out, but for the first time, humanity was looking at a future where they could rise together as one. Outside, the Zalari fleet grew closer, their ships gathering at the edge of the galaxy. The final test of humanity's strength was coming. And with the power of the Nexus Gate, the Emperor was ready to face it. Humanity would not just survive. They would thrive. The Zalari Dominion's fleet arrived at the edge of human space with terrifying speed. Their warships, built from the wreckage of countless conquered worlds, formed a menacing armada, each ship a symbol of their desire to reclaim the Nexus. It was clear that the Zalari were not just seeking power, they were desperate to reclaim the ancient technologies that had slipped through their fingers. The battle that loomed was not just about dominance, it was about survival. The Emperor stood before their assembled fleet, the weight of leadership heavy on their shoulders. The unity they had fought so hard to forge was now being tested in the fires of war. Diplomacy had failed. Negotiation had failed. Now, there was only one option: fight or fall. The human fleet, far smaller in number than the Zalaris, was spread across multiple fronts. But humanity was not without its advantages. The Nexus had provided them with access to technologies beyond anything the Zalari could comprehend, technologies that would turn the tide of the war if wielded correctly. The Emperor addressed the fleet from the command deck of their flagship, their voice cutting through the din of activity. We are humanity's last hope. We fight not just for control of the Nexus, but for the future of every living soul who calls this galaxy home. We fight for the promise of tomorrow. For the generations to come. Our strength lies not in the number of ships we command, but in the unity we have forged. Let them feel the might of a united humanity, asterisk asterisk. The fleet responded with a resounding cheer, each ship's crew motivated not by fear but by the unshakable belief that they were fighting for something far greater than themselves. For the first time, the factions that had once been divided were fighting as one. The first engagement took place near the outermost colonies, where the Zalari launched a brutal assault, expecting to break through the human defenses with ease. They were met with resistance like they had never seen before. Human warships, empowered by the Nexus Gate's strange technology, moved with incredible speed and precision, their weapons tearing through Zalari shields with deadly efficiency. It was as if the fabric of space itself had bent to humanity's will. However, the Zalari were relentless. They were veterans of countless wars, and their ships were designed for one purpose: to conquer. They responded with overwhelming force, pouring fire into human positions and attempting to push the fleet back. The skies over the colonies burned with the light of battle. Back on the Nexus station, Rhea, the technician who had first uncovered the architect's being, stood in the heart of the station's core. The entity had given humanity the key to unlock the full potential of the Nexus, but that power came with a price. The station's internal systems were designed to amplify energy, warp space, and generate unimaginable weapons of destruction. But the process was delicate. One wrong move, one miscalculation, and the power of the Nexus could destroy everything in its path. Rhea worked tirelessly, coordinating with the Emperor's fleet, feeding them vital data from the station, ensuring the weapons were primed and the systems aligned. Every second counted. As the battle raged outside, she could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. But there was no turning back now. The Emperor's voice crackled through the comms. "Do it, Rhea. We're ready, asterisk asterisk." With a trembling hand, Rhea activated the final sequence. The station hummed with an energy so vast that it seemed to distort the very fabric of the universe. A massive pulse of energy erupted from the Nexus, expanding outward like a wave crashing across the galaxy. The Zalari fleet, caught in its wake, found themselves powerless. Their ships, previously so formidable, were rendered helpless, their systems overwhelmed by the sheer force of the Nexus. The Emperor, watching from the command deck of their flagship, saw the effects unfold. Zalari warships began to malfunction, their shields collapsing, their weapons turning on themselves. The human fleet pressed forward, capitalizing on the chaos, launching a final assault to break the Zalari's lines. The battle was fierce, but the tide had turned. Humanity had not only defended their home, they had struck back with a force that shook the foundations of the galaxy. As the final Zalari warship was brought down, the battlefield fell silent. The once mighty Dominion had been defeated, their fleet shattered, their forces broken. The Emperor stood at the helm, watching the remnants of the Zalari forces retreating into the void. But the victory came with a heavy cost. The human fleet had taken significant damage, and many lives had been lost. Yet the battle was over, and the Zalari were no longer a threat. Humanity had proven, without a doubt, that they were no longer the underdogs in this galaxy. They were the masters of their fate. The Emperor, weary but resolute, spoke to their people once more. "We have won, not because we were stronger, but because we stood together. We fought as one. And now, the stars are ours to shape, asterisk asterisk." The future of humanity was uncertain, but one thing was clear: the age of scattered nations, of fractured species, was over. The empire of humanity had risen. The Nexus Gate had not only unlocked the power of the past, but it had given humanity the opportunity to build a new future. As the Emperor looked out over the galaxy, they knew that this was only the beginning. There were more challenges to face, more threats to overcome. But humanity had proven one undeniable truth to the universe. They were not to be underestimated. The galaxy would know the name of humanity, and they would remember it for all time.